I was looking forward to this presentation myself for the last couple of weeks. I thought I had this great notion that leaving RT, I'd have the last couple of weeks of saying goodbye to people, you know, and having long lunches and talking about the past and thinking about the future. And suddenly the budget came along, and I really only got around today to basically distilling what has been about a year of thought processes behind getting out of RT and getting into a new form of news production. So I actually I was twittering today, and I was saying how I had to wing it. And someone tweeted back and said, well, that sums up the news at the moment. I mean, we all have to wing it because this is a moment of disruption, and that's the key thing for me. It's not a recession. And you hear media executives tell you that, well, we have this downturn in advertising, or we have this digital migration, and once we cope with that, we'll be okay. We'll get back to the model as it was. And I look at them and I'm thinking, you know, what part of digital migration don't you understand? My theory is that there's a new consciousness in the way that we consume news that changes the game completely. I think newspapers obviously have the most serious difficulties, but I think TV and radio obviously have huge challenges. And news in particular just can't survive the way it is. So hence my assertion that the news is dead. Long live the news. I think there's opportunities that come along with the crisis that really excite me. And I'll give you just my own personal experience why I've come to the point where I've taken a leap out of a lovely, safe public sector job with a nice pension. The honour of serving beside Miriam O'Callaghan in the studio all the time and basically not having to worry about working as hard as I would in the private sector. Why did I jump? It all goes back to Afghanistan. I was there in 2006, and I remember coming back and we had about 2.5 hours of material, and it was just stunning to be back in that country. I had been there in 2001. To go back and to see it up close, we went into an edit suite and we produced an 8.5-minute report. And so basically the majority of that 2 hours of material was just thrown away. It was literally dumped and wiped within a week. And I remember thinking at the time, what a complete waste that you have all this material from a trip to Afghanistan, and it's just like buying a cow and taking a piece of steak and throwing away the rest of the carcass. I mean, literally we were wasting content that was of interest to people. And it was driven home to me a couple of months afterwards. We had interviewed the most prominent policewoman in Afghanistan. She was a captain in Kandahar, and her responsibility was to basically bring the issue of domestic violence out in the open and help women to fight it. She was a stunningly courageous woman. And I was sitting in the Dart about 4 months later reading the Irish Times, and there was a 2-line mention of the fact that she'd been killed by the Taliban. Now, I had this basically hour of material with her. And I went into prime time and I said, listen, we have this material. We have pictures today of the aftermath of the shooting. We should put together a profile of this woman to tell people about what she did. We couldn't get on air that night. I can't remember what the story was. I'm sure it was something to do with health or recession or the subjects that are near and dear to us at the moment in journalism. And I just remember thinking at the time, that was not just a shame. That was, in some ways for me, in journalistic terms, that was criminal, that we just didn't have that opportunity. And I remember thinking it would never have happened if we had unlimited bandwidth. If we could say, you can see the recessionary material that everyone wants to see, you can see the debate about the bank crisis, but beneath that we're also going to show you this material with this woman. And in many ways that's what social media provides. That's what the new media model will provide us with, a chance to actually pick the depth at which we want to consume news. You want to see 30 seconds of that woman, I'll give you that, but I'll also give you the hour. And everything can coexist. We have simultaneous platforms in which we can basically consume news at the depth that we choose. That's the revolutionary concept for me. It also, when I went to Iraq in 2003, we were charged €9,000 for excess baggage because we were bringing along an edit suite. We were bringing along flak jackets. We were bringing along, it wasn't Ryanair, no. Although they do land in Baghdad, it's just not Baghdad, it's kind of Istanbul. And basically, we got out there, and it was stunning. You know, everywhere we went, we had to ride with, you know, armoured plating cars, and we had to do security fixers. It was just an unbelievable level of organisation, and people who've been out in documentary filmmaking will know the money that went into it. You fast forward to, and I would never have gone anywhere without the crew and the security guards, and it was just the way I was taught. You know, hostile environment. You have all this backup and all this money is spent. You know, hundreds of thousands of euro I think we spent on the war for RT's point of view. Fast forward to today where you have FTP, you can send a package back for almost nothing. You can communicate by sat phone, by Skype for nothing. The camera that I went with to Iraq was worth maybe 120 grand. It was top end. You know, now the camera that you will cost be a fraction of that. So suddenly now the means of production in journalism are in the hands of individuals and real people. And they basically can do what this crew who spent £9,000 in excess baggage did in 2003. And that was a revelation to me. It kind of worried me a little bit because suddenly now there's no role for the professional, but in some ways it's also a liberation. Then along comes social media. The idea of real time, people talking to each other on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And it wasn't driven home to me, the impact on news, I suppose, until a wedding I was at in Tipperary about June of this year, when we were all at the bar, and suddenly someone comes along and says, Michael Jackson's dead. And within 20 minutes later, my mother is dancing to Thriller. I never forget the sight of her, trying to do this. I went back afterwards and realised that the LA Times didn't report officially on the death of Michael Jackson until 5 minutes past 10 Irish time, by which time my mother's already doing her dance, because obviously TMZ and the gossip sites had reported it. And that kind of scared the bejesus out of me. I was thinking to myself, how do we know in Tipperary something that basically the official LA newspaper didn't report until 10:05? The same day, Jeff Goldblum was reported dead. He wasn't dead, of course. It was a social media rumour that picked up traction. So there was kind of dangers and opportunities in that moment. More importantly was what happened in Iran for me later on in terms of the protests that we saw on the streets of Tehran and other Iranian cities, when suddenly this tweet from Tehran on the 15th of June summed it all up. We had people who were reporting on that crisis with their cell phone, with their smartphones, with the iPhone possibly, but even basic communications tools. We saw this crisis through that. We didn't see it through the lens of a camera in front of a foreign journalist standing there as the voice of God telling you what was happening. In fact, they were locked in the hotels. I never forget watching the 10 o'clock news on ITN one night and hearing one of a very esteemed broadcaster from a hotel on a crackly line saying there are reports of shots in, I think, Engelab Square. I was actually on my couch in South Dublin watching the twit pics coming through of the dead bodies on that square at that very moment. And for me, that was kind of the death of foreign correspondency, when these cameras were being used to do something that journalists with all their equipment and their training just couldn't do. That changed everything for me. But it also exposed dangers. That how did you filter? How did you validate? How did you actually say that that was the reality as it was on the ground? How do I know that these images I was seeing were actually from that square, weren't photoshopped? So it raised huge opportunities for me for huge questions. Now, the thing is that all the opportunities can't hide the fact that there is a crisis here. And I just, for example, look at the newspaper industry. This is a graph I saw 2 days ago, which is just the collapse of employment in newspapers in the United States. And obviously you see it rising from the end of the Second World War, hits a peak around the time of Ronald Reagan and the beginning of the first Iraq War, and then just gradually declines and now goes into free fall. Now, quite obviously, what's happening here is that the newspaper model itself, the business model, has broken. I'm not going to tell you the newspaper is dead. I don't think it is. I'm not saying to you that the business model can't be in some ways changed, but it has to in some ways transform itself, because newspapers have real problems, and they're to do with the contradictions of a newspaper in the digital age. First of all, when newspapers go online, they're actually undermining their print edition, because if people can read it, why buy it? I haven't read the Irish Times for 6 weeks, except in work, because I can get it in the morning and I can send it out and we can discuss it before it's even in my hand at the dart station. So that's obviously a problem. The more you move online, the more you undermine your business model. But there's more problems: work practices, cost structures. I mean, this was built, the newspaper model, for a time when journalists had the monopoly on information. When basically you needed a journalist to go out to a war zone and tell you what was happening or do an investigation. Now, because of the digital age and the tools that we have in our hands, not just the phones, but obviously real-time web, suddenly the newspaper no longer has a monopoly. And I think that's the real problem for newspapers. They're caught in an old model, and to move to the new model will destroy them. And I think that's a real problem. I think they've got to learn something, which I'll talk about a bit later on, and that is the main thing is no longer the main thing. News will be free. That's it. There is no debate about it. The debate was over, I think, when we basically all moved on to get our newspaper coverage online. That's not to say you can't make money out of journalism. I'll talk about that a bit later, but they've forgotten that you just can't paywall news. Rupert Murdoch is onto a loser if he thinks he can just migrate behind a big paywall and think that will save him. It will not. So I think newspapers have a specific problem. As for TV, as for radio, by definition, they're in a better position to weather the storm because they're interactive. You know, everything from Joe Duffy to Ryan Tubridy in the morning takes calls from people. There's a sense of ownership of those programs. You feel like you're hearing people like yourself. So therefore, in that sense, it does actually migrate easier to this digital consciousness where people are participants and not spectators. But the problem is, it also has a fear of devolving power to people, you know? I know in prime time, I know in RTE, and we're not exceptional. There's a real fear of losing control of the editorial agenda, of how we create news. We don't like people looking at us when we're creating news. You know, we used to say the old cliche was that making news is like making sausages. You don't want to see it happening, but it's nice at the end of the process. And that's kind of like the consciousness I was brought up in. Whatever happens, don't let people see what you're doing in private. Just present to them what you've actually got at the end. That just can't work anymore. People want to see how you create the news. There's small things as well. The attitude to technology inside the news business in radio and television is killing news organizations. I mean, I'll just give you an example. That is the RTE issue phone for journalists, and that was agreed on by a committee of journalists, right? They sat down and they used it and they thought that's the best that's available. This is my iPhone, which I also have to have because basically you just can't work without it if you're a self-respecting journalist. But that's my own, on a separate number, because RTE can't support that. They can't basically pay my bill, so I have to pay my bill separately. Now, that's a small example, but there's a way of thinking that I have to say to you is stopping TV and radio, which is best placed to adapt to an online culture, and it's really just a consciousness, a way of thinking that we just try to control everything because we have the control over the means of production. We have to let it go. We've got to involve people in the process of news, and I don't think TV and radio have cottoned on to that to its truest extent yet, and I think for that reason there's an opportunity for people to come along and do something different. Let's just go back to this idea of the person being the broadcaster, the opportunities of the social web, and just explore a moment. Obviously the potential is clear. We can see it every day. Anyone who consumes any real-time social web source knows the potential for getting information from individuals to a wider community. But obviously the dangers are also massive. Just think about what happens when you go onto a blog. I guarantee you go to the blogs that conform to your preconceptions. If you have a choice, you go, if you're liberal or left, you go to the Huffington Post, or you know, if you're right-wing, in the States at least, you go to Instapundit or Fox News or whatever it might be. You basically are provided with a way of never having to confront an inconvenient truth. The web gives you that potential. Now, I think the real-time web, that is Twitter, YouTube, and all Facebook, they're breaking that down slightly. But still the biggest problem is that we, in the new age, are in this kind of position where people are generating masses of information. And effectively, the problem is most of it is noise. Most of what we see on the web, Sturgeon's law, have you ever heard of that? 90% of everything on the internet is crap. Well, I think it's a higher proportion. But the key thing is that there's a small proportion of what's on the web, the information from these social media sources, that is absolute gold, that will give us the sum of all human knowledge in the space of a few years. We, for example, go onto YouTube today. I'll give you this challenge. Go on YouTube and you will see absolute nonsense. But you put in something like, Beethoven's Fifth, and you will get this incredible range of live performances all over the world. You will get to quality quicker. So the issue is, how do we get the news from the noise? And basically this is what I think is the diagram of the future of news. People generate, and that includes professionals as well. So we're all now able to generate news through the iPhone, through social media, through YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Quick, which is a really interesting service that I'm watching now, Flickr, for example, for photography, and then a whole range of other social media platforms. What do we do? Because it's now very confusing. Well, what we have to do is we have to filter, edit, we've got to present. That's the role of the professional in the new media environment. Professionals are not dead. Professional journalists are absolutely necessary. But we have to change our consciousness. We have to think of ourselves effectively as the filter. Because as I think Clay Shirky, who's probably one of the most renowned experts in the new media and the future of news, has said, it's not information overload, it's filter failure. And that's where I think professional journalists have to think. We've got to think about being that filter, that editor, and that presenter, so we can offer people something to consume that actually makes sense, is digestible, and fits their needs. So as far as I'm concerned, that leads us to what I think is the mission of any new news organization. And that is obviously to sort the news from the noise, but to challenge prejudice as well instead of encouraging it. To find something that messes with your mind. Because I think one of the most dangerous things in the social media setting at the moment is this kind of algorithm that says if you like this, you like this. I mean, that's terrible. That is just a mandate for a narrow mind. I want to say, if you like this, you're going to hate this. I want the algorithm that messes with your mind, that challenges you constantly. So that's one thing that I'm concerned about. And obviously, finally, this is the big holy grail. How do you make journalism good business? Well, let's just say you're crazy enough to leave a good job and you wanted to set up your own company and you wanted to make some money out of it. As far as I'm concerned, what would have to happen was you'd have to have 4 elements. Now, this, by the way, is from a person who does actually believe there's a role for journalism in making the world a better place. Someone else might give you some other different model here, which would purely be about this middle part. But first of all, real-time news. What do I mean by real-time news? I mean real-time social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. And what they share is, they're like ticker tape. The conversations that go on around a whole series of subjects, from what you have in the morning for your breakfast to climate change, are real time. They change constantly. If you ever watch a hashtag on Twitter and you just go and you filter out the conversations around that subject, it's stunning. If you have too many sources, it can be unintelligible. But if you have the right sources, it is so much better than any chat show I have ever heard in my life. So the challenge is, you have a platform on your website where effectively you're identifying the super users, the pro-ams, the people who know something. You're importing their conversations, and that is your news agenda in the morning. Your curator comes in, watches what people want to know about through Google Trends, through other metrics. You can track all these social web platforms to see what people are talking about. That's going to be your editorial meeting in the morning. You're getting content on these links people are sending out in Twitter and Facebook. So you want to aggregate that content. What's the best thing you're seeing here? Now, it could be a ridiculous example like a 911 call from Tiger Woods, or it can be something more than that. It can be actually these great databases about our world today that can be condensed now into a short URL in a 440 character message. So what you can get on things like Twitter is so much more than I can offer you on prime time or any program on television. We just need to aggregate and filter it. Obviously you're validating, you're trying to find the most authoritative sources. In this city, in the NDRC and Trinity and DCU, there are people working at the moment on technologies that will allow us to rate the reliability and dependability of social media users by small things, like, for example, do you link most to BBC or do you link most to the National Enquirer? Do people quote you online? Do people refer to you? Do people retweet you? Do they mention you? Suddenly you can get applications where I can say to you, I can get you the top 100 users of Twitter on any subject you want to know about, monitor what they say, and let us lead. They will lead us into the conversation on any particular topic. Again, this is all very complicated, but I just wanted to give you something that you can hang on to in real terms to see what this might look like. And then finally, obviously, a presenter still has a role. It's to present, hopefully, the filtered, packaged version of what we've been watching on all those real-time platforms. And that still will be in the form of TV. What form it takes, I think it could be in the form of chat contributions. But the great thing is, what used to cost €2,000, a satellite link from a foreign city, is now effectively free through voice over internet, through Skype, through online meeting rooms. I can get 16 people in a very simple program into an online meeting room for free from anywhere in the world, as long as they have a web browser and a webcam. So that just gives you a sense of what's possible. The second part of this platform is that we have professionals out there who will contribute finished video content, from documentary makers to stringers on the ground who watch a breaking news event. But there's also pro-ams. I'll give you an example. Getty Images. I've just done a deal with Flickr, which is the photographic website that shares photographs. What they've said is we don't anymore have a photographer in Montevideo, but we know 50 people out in Montevideo who are amateur photographers who are very good, very qualified. They just don't do it for a living. We're going to do a deal with the best of them. So suddenly they have a supply chain with pro-ams who they will say, listen, don't worry necessarily about the quality. We can Photoshop, we can improve and process when it gets back to Dublin. But effectively you set up that supply chain. The benefit is that I don't go to Baghdad anymore. I get the really intelligent, smart guy that used to make me look good on the ground, the fixer, equip that person with the basic camera technology, connectivity, hopefully provide some security for that person, and basically try and draw in that person into the supply chain. So it's no longer what I say to you an hour off the plane. The person who's on the ground is the person who should be telling you what's going on. They're much more proximate to the truth. And I feel they have a role in the process that has to come from this change. Personal democracy, I feel there's a huge role for bringing together all these databases from, let's say in Ireland, we would have the registration of interests that we have from SIPO up in Nestor House. We'd have the company office where we'd have the company registrations details. We could cross-reference databases. You know, we see at the moment they're dumping expenses information out there, and it's ridiculous because what happens is the Daily Mail or whatever will just find the €5 bar of chocolate you bought in wherever it was, or the movie you watched in a hotel room. But actually what I'd like to do is much more than that. I'd like to cross-reference to see, for example, if certain companies constantly come up in donations to particular politicians. Establish trends and give people, ordinary people, the tools to do that with a certain amount of guidance from curators. Again, I can go into that in more detail, but effectively what I'm just saying there is give ordinary citizens the powers to filter and aggregate publicly available information in a sensible and usable way. That's what I mean by personal democracy. Finally, humanitarian news. I mean, part of the problem is any time a journalist gets to a war zone or a disaster zone, it's already too late, by definition. Because ultimately, you know, I was in Niger a few years ago and there was a big hullabaloo about this famine was about to come to Niger. So we all got on a plane, we got there. But I realised that it was no different from the previous year. It just so happened there was a more effective PR person in Niger that year for the humanitarian organisations. Did that mean we shouldn't have been there? No, it didn't. It just meant we should pay more attention to people on the ground who can give us early warning of humanitarian disasters happening and who basically have much better access than any journalist has to the actual reality of what life is like here. I also think you can share information. There's several internet platforms doing this about conditions in different countries for use by humanitarian organisations. So I just think that that would be my perfect news organisation in the digital era. It would have effectively liberated people from this kind of you and me sense. It would give you a chance to participate, but you'd still have professional guidance and curation at the very heart of it. The questions I'm asked most these days, it used to be, do you miss Washington? How's Miriam really in real life? Can you get me tickets to the Late Late Show? And all those basic questions. But now the question is, where's the business model? That's the single biggest question people ask me. And I think basically that's kind of missing the point in some ways, because there is no value in news anymore as a raw material. It has to be free. People will want it, they'll get it, they're not going to pay for it. But they will pay, possibly, and I think probably, for the package it comes in. So effectively, if you want it filtered, you want it validated, and you want to present it in a digestible fashion, in the way that suits you, you will pay for that process. You won't pay for the raw information, you'll pay for the process it goes through. So for example, news agencies, broadcasters, and marketing companies all are demanding content. Like really, there is incredible insatiable demand, because they know now that they have to cut back, they have staff shortages, they need content still, and they'll be willing to offer the right content producers money for that. Mobile is going to be the holy grail, because there are three trends in news at the moment that are going to change the world. Video, because people want to consume news through video more and more. Mobile, that is, in places like India, people are bypassing laptops and going straight from the binary world to the digital world on their phones. Young kids, they're paying almost nothing for handsets, which are basically sponsored, subsidized. And they're going on, and they want it mobile. And then finally, emerging markets. We have to look to what's happening in India, Indonesia, in places like that, because that's where digital penetration is just exploding. And what I'm saying is mobile operators are going to be the key to the transmission of content, and news producers have to realize that. How it operates, I don't know, because still some mobile operators, with all due respect, anyone here from Vodafone or O2, are still living in the last 2.0 age. They haven't caught up really to the 3.0 reality. I think a lot of this is going to be that you're going to have web TV emerging, whereby, just look at this for example, this is off a laptop, but you're seeing it on a plasma screen. Ultimately, the transmission mechanisms are being created to allow internet and mobile phone technology to transmit onto television. So you can see just what you see on your iPhone, just as easily on your TV station, your TV platform, and this is all going to get mixed up. And mobile phone operators are going to be the key to all of this. So we have to find a way of partnering mobile operators with news producers. Web TV, as I said. Advertising is interesting. Anyone at the moment who puts advertising down in a business model for new journalism is going to be laughed out the door. You can get no more, I think, than 20–25%, and believe me, I've looked at this, revenue from advertising currently if you're an online news platform. But I think that will increase, because I think advertising will be transformed from being simply just something that comes up in front of you when you click on a page, to being something that actually has much more focus. It could be in the form of promotions. There's a great scheme operating in Holland. IKEA are sponsoring the worst kitchen in Holland competition, where you take a picture of your kitchen, you send it to the newspaper, who publish it all on their website, and IKEA picks the worst kitchen, gives you a free kitchen, but everyone else gets a €20 voucher. And there's a great example of advertising which produces content for the newspaper and a chunk of money. IKEA get a database, people who self-select to be part of this database. And obviously on top of that, the consumer gets a €20 voucher and maybe a bit of publicity for the state of their kitchen. So I mean, there's partnerships that can work with brands, and I think advertising will go down this route of partnership, incentive, promotion, much more than just simply throwing a banner up in front of you that you just want to get past. So for me, basically, that's kind of where the value lies. I'm aware of the time now. I could go on about this because, to be honest with you, part of my problem is I haven't stepped back yet. I've been so immersed in this for the last 6 months that I'm still working through what is actually the key salient points. The most important thing is nobody knows for certain. I've just set you out what I think is the course that a news organisation will take in the digital age. It'll be like when video recorders were introduced and someone bought a Betamax and someone bought a VHS, and very quickly the Betamax was thrown in the bin. Well, everything people tell you about news right now will change. I just think they're the dominant trends, the things people have to watch out for. So the most important thing about news is it has to future-proof itself. It has to prepare for basically a stream of eventualities. News is dead the way it was, but there's an incredible future in it. And I absolutely believe that, and that's why I'm standing here in front of you as someone who, while I still may have a parachute, I've just jumped out of the plane. And I'll tell you something, I've never been more excited about the potential for people who really believe in this, and I really would love to hear your questions. Thank you.